when it comes to autism, we are talking more about selective eating rather than just picky eating. I think that the term picky eating oftentimes causes people to think that they have a choice. They have a choice to become limited in the foods that they'll eat, and they're just doing it because they're spoiled or whatever it might be. And that is so far from the truth. What we're talking about here is very real, extreme sensory aversions that are playing into a child's ability to eat certain foods. Hello everybody, welcome back to the Nourishing Autism Podcast. I'm Brittyn Coleman, the autism dietitian. I'm so excited for this upcoming episode. We are talking all about sensory aversions and selective eating. You might be interested to know that up to 90% of children on the autism spectrum are selective eaters. Now, a huge reason behind this is something called sensory processing disorder. And sensory processing disorder really affects the way that our brains interpret our external senses. And when we're eating food, all of our senses are coming together at once. We smell our food, we taste it, we feel it, we feel the texture and the temperature and all of these different characteristics of the food. Now, for kids who have sensory processing disorder, the external sense that they are interpreting, that their brain is interprets it incorrectly or as more or less of a threat than it should be. What I mean by this, some kids are going to be really overwhelmed by or overstimulated by maybe even the smallest sound, or maybe a tag in the back of their shirt, or maybe it's a texture that feels just completely intolerable to them, or it could be a color that seems really threatening to them. And so eating becomes this experience that is just absolute sensory overwhelm. And for kids who have certain sensory aversions, eating just becomes an activity that they just don't want any part of. And so what happens is that kids start to limit their diet because of these sensory aversions. Now, let me say, this is not a child just choosing to be picky. When it comes to autism, we are talking more about selective eating rather than just picky eating. I think that the term picky eating oftentimes causes people to think that they have a choice. They have a choice to become limited in the foods that they'll eat, and they're just doing it because they're spoiled or whatever it might be. And that is so far from the truth. What we're talking about here is very real, extreme sensory aversions that are playing into a child's ability to eat certain foods. Now, there is so much more to it than that. There's oral motor control, there is low muscle tone, a lot of other pieces that come into this. Even gut issues can affect a child's appetite and what foods they actually want to eat. And again, none of these things are in their control, but it is affecting the foods that they can eat. But at the root of it all, sensory processing issues really come into play here. So kids can be averse to different textures, they can be averse to different colors, different temperatures. I mean, they can be averse to anything, and it really comes down to their individualized sensory processing that is happening. Now, when it comes down to texture, a child could avoid something that's crunchy, or they could really prefer something that's crunchy. That's actually one of the most common texture preferences that I see. They could avoid something that's mushy or creamy or soft or maybe really chewy. I see some kids who crave those textures as well, so it really comes down to the individual. When it comes to colors, we might see that a child might prefer more neutral colors rather than the super bright colors or super dark colors that come along with some common vegetables that a child might associate with a certain taste, like a bitter taste. Some kids might prefer those brighter colors because they're seeking some sensory input. Some kids might be trying to get away from all of the extreme sensory input that they can. Those kids would prefer more beigey, neutral colors because it feels more comfortable and less overstimulating. Now, when it comes down to a temperature perspective, we have some really drastic temperatures like frozen and hot, and some kids who really want sensory input might go for those types of temperatures. Now, for kids who have aversions to really extreme temperatures, they might be staying to more of the room temp, warm, or cold foods. Now, on top of that, what temperature can change is the smell. And so for kids who have some really strong smell aversions, they may prefer cold or room temperature foods. When foods get heated up, the sensory impact of smell is going to increase. And so what we see is that for kids who do have that smell aversion, they're going to prefer room temp, cold, or frozen foods. So it's really interesting to be able to see the preferences that come along with sensory aversions or their sensory needs. Eating is so rooted in sensory for kids on the autism spectrum. It's a huge shame whenever feeding therapists don't take into account the sensory input and they're only putting in the focus on the behavior, because picky eating, when it comes to autism, is so deeply rooted in the sensory piece that if we are missing it, we are just missing out on a huge chunk of where we could be successful. So we want to make sure that we are implementing all of the different approaches that implement your child's sensory needs and aversions, and we are utilizing that in order to come up with a plan that is going to help your child succeed based on their sensory needs and using this very child-led approach. Now, if you're needing support with this, I actually just launched a completely new individualized roadmap inside of my membership called the Nourishing Autism Collective. And inside, what happens, you go in, you take a quiz, and it sorts you into your individualized roadmap. Now, if you are a parent who's really needing support with picky eating, it will put you into this picky eating track that is going to teach you exactly how to lay the groundwork at your mealtime to help reduce sensory overwhelm, but then also create a plan. I have a 3-step plan to help you understand which foods to implement based on your child's sensory needs. Then we use a process to help expand your child's diet based on what we know from both their sensory needs and nutritional needs. And from there, I teach you how to introduce new foods so that we are following a very sensory-friendly approach to expand your child's diet. We actually have about 30 steps from seeing a food for the first time to actually having your child eat it. And what's really cool is that we have a community inside of the membership, and we support you along each individual step of you expanding your child's diet, whether that means smelling the food or touching it or finger painting with it or touching it to their lips or chewing it and spitting it out. Whatever that means, we get to celebrate alongside you, which is a really special piece of this journey. So I would love to invite you to try out this completely new individualized roadmap inside of the Nourishing Autism Collective. I am so excited about it, and I just can't wait for you to see it. So if you would like more information about how to join the Nourishing Autism Collective, you can check the show notes below, and you can also DM me the word collective, and I will send you the link to sign up so that you can join our community and start getting support on how to expand your child's diet in a sensory-friendly way that is geared toward autistic and neurodivergent children. Hopefully this podcast has helped you understand more about your child's sensory aversions and how that plays into their choices when it comes to food. I would love to support you more. Catch me inside the Nourishing Autism Collective or on Instagram at Autism Dietitian. I look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks so much for joining me for another episode of Nourishing Autism. If you enjoyed this podcast, I'd love to invite you to join us inside of the Nourishing Autism Collective, an empowering and supportive community for moms of kids on the autism spectrum to get nutrition and picky eating support from me and my team of autism dietitians, access my autism nutrition library, explore hundreds of kid-friendly recipes, connect with other moms on a similar journey, and learn from top autism experts like occupational therapists, speech therapists, and more. Come join us at nourishingautism.co. Also, if you enjoyed this podcast, I'd be so grateful if you shared it with a friend and gave it a 5-star review on Apple and Spotify podcasts so I can spread the word about nutrition for autism and reach more amazing families like you. See you next time.